You're listening to Three Kitchens Podcast, hosted by Erin Walker and Heather Dyer. Tune in weekly to get inspired and make good food.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Three Kitchens Podcast. Thanks for joining me, Erin, and my co-host, Heather.
Your host. I'll host you. Hello. You host me. You host me.
I'll play host today.
Okay, cool.
All right.
It really doesn't matter. That's what co-hosting means.
Right? There you go.
Yeah.
A little lesson for you all there.
We are experts when it comes to hosting things.
Well, we try to be anyway.
I got to tell you a quick story. It's nothing food related or anything, but this morning on the way to dropping the kids at school, the car ahead of me had flames coming out the back of it.
Pardon me?
It was this SUV. I think it was a RAV4 or something. A Highlander, actually, I think it was. Ahead of me and just left of where I would think the hitch would be, like just kind of left of center. So I'm not sure what would be there. There wasn't like a big exhaust pipe or anything. So I'm not sure what it was coming out of, but there were like flames kind of coming out and smoke. And then it would kind of go out and then it would start again. And I was like, oh my God, look guys, this car is on fire ahead of us. And the kids were like, whoa, so cool.
Is it going to blow up?
Yeah, they were just like, oh no, what's going to happen? And I was going to get out, but the light changed. So we bump up ahead to 14th Street and we stop and I like hop out of my car and I go running up to her window and I scared the shit out of the driver. Oh my God.
I'd be scared if someone all of a sudden pounded on my window.
I didn't pound. She didn't see me stand there. So I tapped and she jumped and she like clutched her heart like, oh, and she like fell back like she was so startled by me standing there. And I'm like tapping. I'm like, so she cracks her window and kind of glares at me like, what do you want kind of thing? Yeah. Like, I'm not asking for money. I said, I'm sorry to scare you, but your car is on fire. Like there's fire coming out of the back of your car. And she was sort of calm. Like me being there was scarier than the fact that her car was on fire. She kind of goes, what? And I said, I don't know. Your car's on fire. And then I just like, cause I didn't want to hold up all the traffic. So
yeah, you got to get back in your car.
So I just I said, sorry for scaring you. And I ran off back to my car. And then we were all moving around. And the guy in the turning lane hopped out when she came out and came and looked. He hopped out and was looking at it. And she goes back there and she sort of blows on it and waves her hand in front of it. Like she's just going to blow out a match. And like, I was like, good luck with that. I think you need more help than just...
It's not a birthday candles.
No, your car is literally shooting flames out of it. I don't know what happened, but then when I came back, they weren't there anymore. So I don't know. And I came in and told Todd and he goes, well, did you call 911? Because like, that's not right. That should not be happening. The fire department needs to come and like check that out. And I was like, no, there was a guy there. He had a phone in his hand. I'm sure they figured it out.
You did step one.
And the kids were like, the one was like, well, now I'm really nervous. Like, what if our car's on fire and we don't know it? This could happen anytime. I was like, yeah, I guess it could. She didn't know her car was on fire. So anyway.
Why would it be burning from under there?
I have no idea.
That is an oddity.
I know. And it didn't look like an exhaust. That's not where exhaust comes out, in the middle of the back of your vehicle. So I'm not really sure what that pipe or what's there.
Well, you scared the living daylights out of someone this morning.
I sure did. And then I was like, and then I look in the mirror and I'm like, maybe it was because I still had like my hair on top of my head from like, I didn't do anything with it from bed. And it was like a big disaster and I looked like a fright. Like,
so you could have been asking for money is what you're saying. She wasn't wrong to be like,
yeah, like glaring at me like you just terrified me and you're asking for change.
The weirdest things you see sometimes when you're driving.
So if that was you, if you're listening, you never know. And your car was on fire and a strange, scraggly looking person came to your window this morning and scared the daylights out of you. I'm sorry. I hope your car's okay. Fun. Okay.
That's a crazy story.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to tell you about French onion soup.
Oh, well, but that's a great segue.
I've made French onion soup quite a few times at home, and I quite honestly like it. When our children were little, we called it French noodle soup, and we told them that the
Oh,
onions in there were special French noodles so that our kids weren't like, ew, these are onions. And then they figured
cute.
out over time that they were actually onions that went into the French noodle soup.
I like that.
If you're not lying to your kids when it's convenient for you, you're not parenting right. There's my
What
advice.
even are you doing?
Take advantage of the naivety of your children when they're young.
That's right.
So French onion soup is generally, I make it just by frying up a whole bunch of onions, and then you add in your broth and your seasoning, you cook it for a while, and then you serve it in a bowl with a piece of toasted bread and usually like a Swiss cheese or a Gruyere cheese on top. Oh, it's warm and bubbly, and it usually burns the roof of your mouth if you're impatient like I am because you're so hungry. But it's like a full meal, and I really love a good French onion soup. And I thought, I like my French onion soup, but I want to up my French onion soup game. I want to make my own beef broth because I have some beef bones that we got with our beef order the last time, and they're still occupying my freezer, and I keep moving this giant bag of bones all around so that I can get at all the other meat that's in there. And I'm like, I got to do something with these bones, and I think this is going to be the best way to really put a homemade beef broth on display. And even if you don't want to make the beef broth because you're not feeling crazy, it's a little bit of an undertaking as I'm reading through this recipe. I'll let you know right now. Just use the store-bought stuff, and the recipe that I'm gonna pop up on the blog, it is delicious. I really like this one. So
I can't wait. I love French onion soup. I've tried to make it a couple times and I didn't think it was quite what I was after.
I'll be very interested to see how you rate this French onion soup because it's been a long time since I've had a not cooked by me French onion soup. So I don't even know how this compares to anything out there anymore. So this is just what I like. So hopefully you all like it too.
I'm sure I will. The fact that it's homemade.
Taking the time to do something from scratch can be
usually better.
Often it's rewarding. Let's hope it can't go too wrong.
Yeah. So what's involved in making, or are you just going to get into that?
What's involved in making this? I'll give a brief rundown and let you know how it goes when I come out on the other side. But you're going to take your beef bones, carrots, leeks, onion, garlic. You're going to put them on a roasting pan and roast them for 20 minutes to brown them and get them nice and get all that nice, deep, rich flavor. And then you're going to pop them into a big stock pot because I'm making if you're going to do this, make a big batch. Don't just make a little thing of broth.
Well, and beef bones are kind of big. You need room in a pot.
So in your pot, you've got your roasted bones and vegetables that we just talked about. Any juices that come out while you're roasting them, put that in that pot too. As well, you're going to add celery, bay, peppercorns, vinegar, and then all the water that you need to cover the bones and the vegetables. Cover the pot, bring it to a boil. Easy peasy, right? Reduce heat and simmer at very low temperatures for 8 to 24 hours.
Wow.
So that's
a long time.
This is the long game.
And that's a big difference between 8 and 24. How do you determine when to take it off?
This one says don't leave your stove unattended. You can just leave it on the stove top, turn off your burner, and then come back to it the next day and turn it on again and keep simmering it. So you don't have to do this overnight.
You may not sleep. You have to sit and look at your pot. So
we will not be taking pictures of me after I make the broth because I'll just be strung out from
I stayed up all night watching my pot boil.
I've been in the kitchen all night, kids. Oh no. You could also do this in a slow cooker.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that might be another way to do this that's maybe a little less hands-on.
Well, then in that case, you probably could put something in the oven as well.
Oh, totally.
You wouldn't want a burner, an element or a flame going unattended, but you could have your oven on low.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at us just mixing up the methods here.
There you go. We just see, we're also experts
at winging
changing things up. So it says the longer you simmer it, the better your broth will be. And so something that I've come to understand from beef broth is that if you simmer it for a long enough time, you're going to start breaking down the gelatin that's in the bones, and your broth will actually like congeal into a jelly when it cools. And that is apparently the sign of a good broth. So if your broth, after you strain it and put it into your jars and let it cool, it turns into like a gelatin, you're winning.
Even though you've strained it. Oh, how interesting.
It'll be a liquid when it's warm, but as it cools, it'll become this like thick gelatin. And so you've really extracted a whole bunch of goodness out of those bones.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. I don't think this is something you're going to do every day. But the best part of this is if you've got a whole bunch of broth that you make, you can keep this in mason jars in your freezer for years, I would say. Not that you will, because it's probably going to taste delicious and you'll gobble it all up and then be like, oh, my broth is gone. But I'm going to follow the directions here on the epicurious.com website. And then I'm going to share my French onion soup recipe, which I think is a gooder. And when you get some fresh onions out of your gardens, because you know we're all planting onions this year, we're going to have some delicious French onion soup.
How many onions do you need to make a pot of soup?
It depends. I always use white onions, which tend to be fairly large. And so you can usually get away with 3 to 4 white onions.
Okay. I love that it's just as simple as broth and onions. And it's so freaking good. Like it's so delicious and it's so simple.
It gets better the longer you cook things. Much more flavor is going to come out of it. So I think the key to this is just low and slow and better methods that will bring you better flavors. And it's not that much stuff that goes with it. I think I put a bit of Dijon and some thyme in it.
And you want those onions to be like soft. They almost like melt in your mouth. Like they almost kind of just fall apart when you take a spoonful of soup. You don't want to be like crunching onions. So you have to make sure, like that's the reason you're going to cook them a long time, nice and slow. So they're super like soft and melty almost.
Yes.
And you don't want a sharp onion, like a raw onion. Everybody knows they're sharp and like, woof. That's when you get like the kid saying, I don't like the onions.
Yes.
When you cook them to the point where they're just like sweet and soft and delicious, then they're like, oh, this is a noodle?
Yeah.
Even when they know it's not a noodle. At this age, they know it's not, but they're like, oh, I like onions this way.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
Like you may not like a raw onion on your hamburger, but you like a nice, melty, cooked onion in a bowl of soup. Oh, I can't wait. And and the topping makes the soup, like the bread or sometimes it's croutons that you get I don't know, depending where you go and how it's made.
So generally for making that bread, you butter and toast both sides of a baguette or a French bread, but I do like your idea of like croutons. Maybe I'll do like chunky bread squares and then you put it on top of your soup and you grate your Gruyere cheese that you like to use, and then you just broil it in the oven until it starts to bubble and sizzle, and then you kind of dig through that.
Because then you get like a chunk of bread that might fit on your spoon, chewy, as opposed to like breaking. Sometimes you got to break the bread and figure out like, have you ever had it where they put a whole pastry, like puff pastry on the top of the dish? It's really good, but you got to kind of like break into it and
you need a knife and it gets a little bit awkward. Yes,
it's
I agree.
Messy. Yeah.
Oh, I think I'm going to try some sort of breadcrumb deal and put that on top.
Oh, yeah.
I did not even think of going here, and you've sent me down a new rabbit trail, Heather.
That's what I'm here for. I'm just doing my job as your host.
Thanks for
co-host.
Thanks for co-hosting this recipe with me.
I'll just gladly eat it. You make it however you want, and I will be happy to eat it as always.
Excellent.
Can't wait. Hey, Erin, do we ever tell people that we have a website?
I think so. It's in our show notes.
We have a website and we post the recipes from our episodes. And we also have recipes on there that have not made it onto an episode. It's just stuff that we've cooked, tested out, and that we love.
Like what you did with that lamb short rib. That was delicious.
That's right. I make donuts with pancake mix. I have that kid who doesn't like to eat pancakes, but he'll eat one in a donut pan.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a way to do something a little bit different, we've got multiple options for you to explore.
And of course, all of our episodes, including the Speakeasy bonus episodes and the drink recipes, that's all on there. So visit us over at threekitchenspodcast.com.
Well, last week we talked about gardening and growing stuff. This week we've got some yummy food that if you get onions out of your garden, let me tell you, you're gonna want to make this soup. Or I don't know, I think you do. Heather hasn't told me if you should be making this soup or not yet.
I'm gonna wait my turn.
Oh, she's still gonna hold me in suspense. All right, so for this French onion soup, I went and made the beef broth for this because I had a bunch of beef bones. And so you don't have to do this to make this soup. Don't feel like, oh my God, I have to do
broth from scratch
just to make French onion soup. You can totally make this with the broth at the store, and I think it's totally good. This is just having fun and upping your game and using the stuff that I had in my freezer.
Yeah, and you have all those bones taking up space in there.
Oh my God.
So
I need to clear those out because I'm getting seriously close to this next order of beef that I'm a little bit intimidated by. However... This recipe was for 4 pounds of beef bones. My bags were like 10-pound bags.
Oh, wow.
So I actually made 2 batches of broth out of this gigantic bag of bones that I had.
Oh, wow.
Which was awesome. And so I made this in 2 stock pots, but we'll just talk about it like it's one broth.
Okay.
All these bones were arranged on a baking sheet along with a couple carrots, a couple leeks, a whole head of garlic, just kind of diced up, put it in your oven, and you roast them at 450 for 20 minutes, and then kind of toss them around and then keep roasting them. So they get nice and deep and brown. And then you just dump this all into a stock pot. You add in celery, bay leaves, peppercorn, and some cider vinegar, and then water to cover it. So this was, I think, 16 cups of water. And you bring this to a boil and then reduce it to simmer, and you let this simmer for 8 to 24 hours was the recommendation.
Longer the better, I'm guessing.
The longer the better. So what I did is I put this on my in my oven and just turned my oven on to, I think I had it about 275 or something. Just keep it at a low, slow simmer. And these sat in my oven all day long. And then I turned it off at the end of the day. And then the next morning, I heated my oven up to 400 to get it boiling again, and then turned it down to 270 and let it go for another 4 or 5 hours. So
you just left them in overnight. Yeah. Because you wouldn't have room in your fridge, so don't worry about trying to get that in your fridge.
No, and they said this was also the recommendations that they made. You can just leave it on your stove top, let it cool, and then continue simmering it the next day if you just want to do this on your stovetop too. So
I like the option of doing it in the oven because you feel a bit more comfortable leaving a low temperature oven on if you had to run out.
And even if you're going to run out, the great thing is that you can just turn it off. You've got that big thing of water that's going to hold that heat. When you come home, just turn it back on again, and then you're good to go. So again, don't feel like you need to do this, but if you do have access to beef bones, this is fantastic.
Is it a particular type of, I don't think I've ever made beef broth. I've made lots of chicken broth, but that's always after I've roasted a chicken, I just throw the carcass into the pot and cover it with water and whatever. But with beef, if you're going to get bones from the butcher or from the farm, are you asking for something in particular?
A mix of marrow bones and bones with a little meat on them. So if you have that, such as like oxtail, short ribs, knuckle bones. I had a couple of the big joints. So I think they were the knuckles. And then there were a couple pieces of rib that was in there.
Kind of just whatever's left after they've butchered, like made all the cuts of meat.
That's sort of what I'm assuming it was.
Interesting.
Yeah. I strained the liquid. So I pulled out the bones and I pulled out the vegetables, and then I just strained the liquid and poured it into mason jars to sit and cool on the counter. As it cools, it starts to solidify and form a gelatin. Yeah, it becomes gelatinous. as it starts to cool. And that's how you know you have a sign of a good beef broth and that you've let it boil long enough. And yay, mine turned into gelée as it cooled.
Gelée, beef gelée.
Oh, gelée.
Oh, right. I can't even remember what episode that was from.
I have no idea where that came. Yeah. I think I got 12 cups of broth out of this.
Nice.
12 or 14. It was a whole bunch. So the good news is that now that I have this, I've popped it in my freezer and I have beef broth for a while. So for making this French onion soup, you're going to want 4 whole white onions, and you're going to cut off the ends, take the peels off, cut them in half, and then you want to cut them into those little rainbows, thinly sliced. Once you've got them all sliced up, you're going to heat up some butter and olive oil in a stock pot again. So this is definitely not all done in the same day if you're making your broth.
Oh, yeah.
And then you add your onions in and you sprinkle 2 teaspoons of granulated sugar on top of the onions, and then you just cook them down over low to medium heat until they really soften and become clear. You just stir, they smell delicious. You can take them until they brown as far as you want to go. So cook them down. It's probably about 20 to 30 minutes of cooking these onions. And this is the part that's the most important when you want to get good flavor out of your French onion soup. So don't
rush it.
Don't rush it and be like, oh, I'm sure that's good enough. So like really let it cook down and go. And then once you've got that, I like to deglaze the pot with white wine. And then I add in Dijon mustard, thyme, bay leaf, and broth. And then you bring that to a boil and let it simmer for about 30-45 minutes. And then you can serve it in your little French onion soup bowls with the toasted baguette and Gruyere cheese on top. And you just pop that in the broiler. So what I did for this is if you're going to use French bread or baguette, you want to slice it into little slices.
Sorry,
I don't have another word for this. I'm like, damn it.
There's a word, I think.
Cut it into little slices of bread and brush each side with olive oil, and then either pop them in your toaster or broil them on both sides until they get brown and crispy, because you don't want to put them in untoasted or they're just going to soak up all the moisture from your soup and be soggy bread, which is kind of no fun. I did this and then I took that out and just diced up each slice of toast into fairly large size croutons. And then I sprinkled this on top of the soup. I had Gruyere cheese that I sprinkled over top, and then you broil it under the broiler until it gets all bubbly and delicious. And then take it out and eat it, and be really careful with touching your soup bowl because the handle is hot.
And don't you always find too that the soup itself is really stinking hot because it's underneath? So you have hot soup and then you put it under the broiler and it's like the whole thing is just smoking hot, which is what you want, but you have to be careful.
It's that hard part where you're like, oh, I can't wait to eat this. And then you're like, I can't eat this. I keep burning my mouth.
Yeah. You got to be careful.
The patience involved in eating French onion soup is the hardest part.
But it also makes it really great because you're taking your time and you're really enjoying. You can't eat it fast, so you have to enjoy it.
Yeah, I don't think there's much more else.
My review?
Miss Heather, to say.
Oh, this was just delightful. It was so good. I love that the broth was like light. Sometimes a store-bought beef broth can be kind of rich and dark, which is what you want for some things. But for this, I really appreciated that, like when you put your spoon in, you almost be like, what kind of broth is this? Before you tried it, because it's a lighter colored, lighter flavored, like it was not a heavy broth, which I really appreciated.
It's usually a darker color when I cook it with store-bought broth. So I was surprised by the lightness in the color. And maybe it would have been darker if I would have just boiled longer.
Yeah, maybe. But I thought it was really delicious. And I liked that it was kind of a lighter broth. And the onions, to me, were like perfect because they were soft and cooked, but they weren't brown.
Okay.
And I like a caramelized onion, but I think in the soup, I prefer it before they get to that dark brown caramelized stage. So I would suggest anyone who wants to make this to do what Erin did and cook them slow so they don't turn crispy or brown on the edges, and don't go as far as to get them dark brown and caramelized.
Yeah.
For some reason, it works better in the soup.
I think so too. I think it becomes too like heavy tasting too. I think that caramelized onion is just, you can't eat as much. It's just so it's intense, right? Yeah.
But I really like this, and it is slightly sweet, I guess, because, the onions are sweet. You put a little sugar in them when you make them. And I liked the sweetness, but it wasn't too heavy. And those croutons with the cheese on top, what I love about the croutons, and we talked about this before you made it.
This was your idea. I've never done this before. So I loved this suggestion so much, and as did my husband. So thank you, Heather. You zhuzhed up my French onion soup.
Yay! And then I got to eat it. Yeah. The reason the croutons work is because you can scoop one crouton on your spoon and not have to like break the bread and try to get it
have this weird awkward moment of eating this bread and this hot soup, and it's all in your face and burning your mouth. Yeah, it is so.
It's a nice spoon size, nice big crouton though. Don't go too small. Mm-hmm. The bigger ones stay crispy a little longer. Oh, it was so delicious. I can't wait to make it, because I've made French onion soup before, but I don't think it was this good. And I don't know if it was because it was store-bought broth, but I'm going to try. I might try your recipe with the store-bought broth and just see.
That's how I've always made
the differences.
And it's always been a family favorite. And so my husband was like, oh, wow, this is really good with the homemade broth. And I said, is it so much better that I should always make it with homemade broth? And he said, no, I don't think so. So I
might not notice.
Good recipe, either or.
Mm-hmm. But get a good broth, I would say. And maybe a low sodium. Yeah. If there's a low sodium option, just so you can control how much salt you put in there. Yours was not at all salty. I thought it was nicely seasoned.
Yeah, I went in at the end because it's quite sweet without salting it. And so I think I did 1.5 teaspoons to 2 teaspoons of salt at the end. In the soup, I always like to leave my broths unsalted, so you can kind of adjust it based on whatever you're cooking. But in the soup, I did add salt at the end, and I just kept adding a little bit more. Yeah, went with that. So
we also had talked before about what kind of alcohol you potentially use to deglaze this. And I think the white wine was perfect. So yummy.
Yeah. It says white wine or red wine are the recommendations in this one. I think it was your sister who recommended a Marsala. I could see that being really good.
Yeah.
And that would add to that sweet, rich flavor that the soup has.
And a red wine would be more rich too, I think. And maybe that's also where you get that kind of deeper color. Maybe. I really liked it with the white wine, but I actually prefer, like, if I'm going to cook with wine, I love white wine with onions, white wine with mushrooms. All that. Yummy.
Totally. Oh, good.
Ooh, this is so good.
This is one of my favorite soups. I found this recipe years ago. I think it was from a Chatelaine cookbook, and I've just kind of made little additions and changes over time as I've customized it to our family's flavors. And yeah, I love this soup so much.
So good. Now I want to make it. So if you grow your own onions, everybody, now you know.
And that's when it's the best.
Karen will assure you they're easy to grow. I'm going to try growing them maybe in pots. We'll see.
Yeah. But onions also grow well in pots. So if you've got flowers, the great thing is because they don't have a huge greenery up top and all their stuff is downstairs in the soil, and your flowers are kind of the opposite. They've got everything up top and small roots downstairs. You can pop onions into a lot of your flower planters or wherever else you've got space. And as long as the squirrels don't dig them up, take a bite and toss them onto your sidewalk.
Little jerks.
You can have some homegrown French onion soup.
Yum. Thank you for making soup. I also really enjoyed your little French onion soup pots.
Oh, aren't those the
cute
little
pots with the handle? And it even says on the outside French onion soup. Like,
I don't know where or how I came across those, but I love them so much.
I don't have such a thing. I'd have to use a ramekin or I don't know what.
Well, next time you make it, just let me know. You can have I have 4. You can have my set of pots.
Cute. So cute. And now for the fine print. Join us over on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on our website at threekitchenspodcast.com. And remember, when you like, follow, subscribe, and review, it helps more people find us. Thank you so much for listening.
And
just don't ask me any questions. Just keep talking.
Okay.